Hello, everybody. Jeff Mason and Hal Moran here. Hey, stick around for a great show about increasing customer value while minimizing waste. Stick around. Hello, everybody. Jeff Mason and Hal Moran, SimpleBiz360, SimpleBiz360.com, SimpleBiz360 podcast. Welcome today. Hal, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you could.
Yeah, hey, Jeff, thanks for letting me come on the program and chat with you a little bit today about lean systems thinking. But first, a little bit about me. Hey, I'm a native product here to St. Louis. My wife and I live in St. Charles currently, been out there about 30 years. We have one daughter, two grandgirls, the greatest grandkids on the planet, obviously, and recently retired from 48 years of work. I did 23 stints through 21 different companies throughout the healthcare industry, and just loving life, retired right now, have a lot of hobbies, working outside, photography, those sorts of things, and are really enjoying this particular time in our life.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's such a pleasure to have Hal, and I've known Hal for 20 some odd years, and Hal and I have always just had some very, very inspiring conversations about business. We both have a passion for the improvement process. As you heard Hal mention, 21 different companies. I'm 32 different companies in 9 different industries. So between the two of us, we've immersed ourselves in the customer service machine of 53 companies, which, we certainly bring a lot of value to this discussion today about that. But in particular, Hal, really dives into processes, dives into waste management, to increasing that customer value. And so sticking with the theme of this show, it's so important that we focus on that customer experience, making those experiences good, making those memorable moments good. And Hal certainly has a history of doing that, and he's going to walk us through some things today. So I'm really excited. So St. Peter's now, but Hal, where did you grow up? What kind of family did you have? What's that look like?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the intro, Jeff, grew up here in St. Louis, never lived anywhere else on a permanent basis. And I've got 3 older brothers. We're all part of the baby boomer generation, grew up in the 50s and 60s. But you haven't asked me yet, where did you go to high school? Which for those in your audience from St. Louis, it's a St. Louis thing.
It's a St. Louis thing, right?
I went to Hazelwood when it was all one school. And my dad was a maintenance manager responsible for keeping a very large metal processing plant operating, keeping it running, keeping it in business. And he was really a fixer. Okay. A guy just fixed things. He kept it running. You got to fix it, and it had a crew, working for him and so forth. My mom, on the other hand, was a homemaker, but she was so much more than that. She was a very gifted artist as well. Whatever my mom's hands touched turned to gold, and so I like to say she was the Martha Stewart before Martha Stewart was ever born.
Okay, yeah. Wow, interesting. And Dad was a fixer.
Yeah.
Now, a fixer in everything. Is that correct? Or
fixer in everything. He was an electrician by trade when he got out of the Army in World War II, but he studied so much, really kind of an applied engineer versus an educated engineer. He's got a couple of patents over in the factory we worked in for a period of years. And so whether it wasn't just electricity, but it was the mechanics, the hydraulics, furnaces, blast furnaces, you name it, he put his hand to it and, made it work.
Interesting. So, wow. Well, thank you for that background on Dad. Now, and Dad's just celebrated what milestone birthday recently?
97, and my mom is 90.
Wow, so, unbelievable.
Yeah,
that is really
still living in the house I grew up in.
That is so cool. Well, and I had the pleasure of knowing one of Hal's brothers, Kevin Moran, and Kevin actually did a review on the book. You'll see his name on the back of the cover of our book, in fact. But so again, just you come from a family I know that loves to look at the pragmatic elements of business, and I think your nickname, if I'm not mistaken, growing up was Babe, which means what? Where are you in the pecking order?
Yeah, so I'm last of the 4 sons, named after my dad, who was the last of 4 sons. So he grew up as Babe. So when I came along, my mom finally agreed to let my dad name one of their sons after him.
Yeah.
And so that fell on me. And so obviously I grew up as Babe. So people outside of work know me as Babe. There are a lot of people don't know my given name.
Awesome. Well, I know I've heard that. I heard it day one when I first met you. So I'm the firstborn. I have two younger sisters, so I'm kind of like at the dinner table. I'm kind of like the alpha eater.
Mm-hmm.
I had rule of the roost there, if you will. So you're the youngest of four boys. I mean, what's that look like in terms of competitiveness? Are you grabbing the last dingy roll when you're eating? I mean, how's that work?
Yeah. So one of the nice things. So there's some pros and cons, obviously,
Right.
being the youngest. First, you get the opportunity of learning what's appropriate, what you can do and maybe get away with.
Right.
But then also you learn quickly from your older siblings what you shouldn't do or what you can't get away with.
Right.
The other thing is it made me extremely competitive. Now, kind of like you, my brother Joe, the oldest, more the driving personality. My brother John and Kevin, the middle kids, even though Kevin was very successful in business, and those are my brother John, kind of the mediator role between old and young and so forth. Where me, I love to compete, but I wasn't the biggest. I'm still the smallest. So I had to learn to compete verbally. And you might guess, that didn't always work out so well. when your brother's this big and you're this big, and you decide, okay, well, blah 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 blah. But anyhow,
Oh, so verbal competition there. Okay, so you really honed your skills. What very cool. And you're very well spoken, which probably has a lot to do with the fact that you started, grooming yourself back then.
I think so.
Yeah. So, you take us to high school. You're a high schooler. I mean, in high school, if you even remember, what are you passionate about in that?
And when you shared that question with me before we met, I thought about that a little bit and the times in which I grew up, and I graduated high school in 75. The high school I went to was only 10, 11, and 12th grade. There were 5,500 kids in my high school. That's bigger than a lot of colleges and universities.
Yes.
And so when I got there, I didn't know anybody. When I was in junior high, didn't know anybody there because none of the kids in my grade school or elementary school were in my classes in junior high or high school. So I think it's also important to say at this point, or at least let your viewers know, I grew up with Tourette syndrome and other co-occurring disorders, but I didn't know what I had until I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
So for me, my passion in high school, to be quite honest, when I was 17, 18, it was getting out and getting to work. Wow. I wanted to make a way for myself.
Wow. So so that was something that you obviously, I'm just guessing here, you experienced some peer pressure, you experienced some uncomfortableness, and just because of, and you didn't know what, they didn't know Tourette syndrome, they didn't know what to call it at that point?
Well, I remember I didn't tell anybody for 20 years after I found out. Then when I told my mom, she said, well, son, I remember taking you to the doctor, and he said you just had some nervous energy. Well, when I found out, I was relieved to know, but then didn't tell anybody for 20 years. So not knowing, I think that helped me to some degree, learn how to deal with, the bullying, the pressures, and those sorts of things. I also have dyslexia and ADHD. But then I'm, to some degree, glad I maybe didn't know, because I'm not sure what path that would have put me on either.
Interesting. Well, it's an interesting perspective, and I appreciate it, and certainly I think there's some viewers out there that would appreciate that too. So, when I think about our relationship, when I think about our discussions, and some of them were minor, some of them were lengthy during our getting to know each other process, starting back in 2001, but I remember, even before asking you to be on the show, the crux of our conversations so often were about how business was being conducted and how it could be done differently and improving on the business. To me, it was a common element of our conversations. Am I recalling that correctly? I mean, is that something you've been passionate about?
Yeah, it is. And I kind of use the illustration. My dad's 97, as I mentioned. he would still love to talk about electricity today. Hey, Dad, I've got this switch leg. I'm trying to fix overtime. Well, son, and he just loves that. I have that too. It's in my DNA. So until the day I die, I'll always be a fixer. I'll always be an improver, always trying to improve the experience, not just for me, but for those who are at work doing the job, servicing customers or people or their fellow associates. So it's just in my DNA.
Interesting. So, and are those things that when you get together with Dad today at 97, I mean, do you still chat about these things? I mean, do you still chat about the improvements or tough situations? Dad, what would you do in this situation? I mean, are you asking advice or?
There's kind of a yes and no.
Yeah.
From my mom and dad, my mom had a traumatic brain injury 22 years ago, so my dad really is just focused totally on taking care of her. But we'll kibitz occasionally about the state of the state or the country or the business or oil prices and just still have that camaraderie.
Oh, interesting. Well, sorry to hear about Mom. I did not know that. So, well, thank you. So, take the audience, if you could, into the industry. Now, you mentioned it up front, healthcare. Was that the only industry you've been involved in, or could you walk us through that?
Well, I think my professional career, I was a part-time manager or a full-time manager after high school at McDonald's for a couple of years. Didn't want to smell like a hamburger, an onion, or a pickle every day, and I knew it wasn't a career for me, but back in the 70s, working at a McDonald's, managing one was a lot different than it is today. A lot of kids around. I just had a good time, developed some relationships I still have today with those people 45, 46, 48 years later.
Wow.
So after that, I went to work in industry with my dad for a couple of years, made good money as a single guy before I got married. And it was there that I learned a lot about systems thinking, from raw material to finished product and everything in between. And I know I mentioned that a little bit later here. But got laid off in '79. Economy started to tank and so forth. And then I got a job at a local drugstore chain as a manager in leadership. And within 18 months, I took a store that was the worst performing store in the chain. And 18 months later, we were the #1 profit store. Wow. And so that is where I really found my passion.
Okay.
So the fixer in my dad and the creative artist in my mom came out.
Okay.
And it's still coming out.
Okay. And the McDonald's stint in between. Now, we know that in the fast food environment, speed to delivery, efficiencies, those are common threads to the fast food industry. I mean, you've got to be efficient. You've got to process a lot of people. So did you drag any of that, those observations you made during that stint into the healthcare industry?
Yeah, I did. A shout out to Jim LaFicus, who was our general manager at the time at McDonald's. And Jim taught me the value of people, and not just Jim. I mean, I learned it from my mom, my dad growing up, other peers, other godly men and women who shepherded my life over my time. But Jim really put it in the context of business, of take care of that customer no matter what. If a customer, and I've kind of adapted Jim's philosophies in business and how he dealt with people into a 3-word phrase that I've used throughout my career in healthcare ever since. It's people matter most. And so he taught me that principle of taking care of the customer and what that means. If you don't, if they're not your customer, they're going to be someone else's.
Sure, absolutely. Well, no, so awesome. So now we've got really this picture of you in your element that you like best. You like this industry. Arguably, you're now in healthcare. You're combining the fixer, you're combining the creative artist in your mom, and now you're ready to blossom. So, and this is where I really got to know you when you were in that genre of life, when you were doing all those things. So, one of the things I think is common to you, and you even mention it in your some of your paperwork that you shared with me, is this systems thinking. Could you explain and elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So systems thinking was really developed at the turn of the Industrial Revolution and really made popular the turn of the 20th century with the likes of Lillian and Henry Galbraith. Most folks don't know who they are, but they implemented systems thinking back in 1900. Henry Ford, people like that you've got to produce these cars, produce washing machines, and produce big household goods and things like that, and you have to do it efficiently. And so Dr. Deming was a disciple of Dr. Walter Shewhart at Bell Labs, and they incorporated and kind of designed or put forth the idea of systems thinking, in that a system is made up of many parts, right? But that part can accomplish the purpose of the whole. Mm-hmm. So take a car, for example. You have a motor. The motor can't accomplish the purpose of the whole. Mm-hmm. The transmission can't accomplish the purpose of the whole. The steering wheel by itself won't get you from point A to point B. Right. So it's the interconnectedness of all of those parts coming together to accomplish the purpose of the whole. And so when business leaders and workers understand the purpose of a system and the components inside of that system, and know that when one part of the system is broken or not functioning properly, it's going to affect everything downstream and sidestream of that particular component. Okay. So it's understanding and seeing the big picture of what systems are all about. And everything is a part of a system or multiple systems.
So what's interesting is how the company operates within those four walls, how they service customers, how customer service is postured. Is it fair to argue that there's systems built into that, the DNA of those positions and those departments?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And if you just take the example of the body, something we all have, something we're all familiar with. Yeah. Well, the body's made up of multiple systems. So you have a cardiopulmonary system, a skeletal system, you have an electrical system in your body, you have a muscular system in your body. You have all sorts of systems, but inside of my cardiopulmonary system, I have lungs. Inside of my lungs, I have tissues. Inside of those tissues, I have cells and things. All of those are components of a system that make my body work, and customer service is no different. Yeah. They relate to sales. They relate to maybe manufacture or distribution. They're directly tied in with the customer. So they're kind of this almost a hub, a central hub that is connecting with all of these other components that run throughout the company or that system.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let me interject here for the viewers. And folks, if there's department leaders, CEOs, COOs, CFOs, presidents, owners out there that are listening to this, again, you've heard us if you follow the show. We talk about thinking. We talk about going and finding quiet time and thinking through the elements of your business without any distractions. This is a very great show because Hal is going to illuminate a little bit more about how you can really think of your company in broken down aspects of many parts coming together to make a whole. And I think that's one of the exciting components of what you bring to the table today, Hal. And I have to say something for the viewers too. You mentioned Mr. Deming and AT&T Labs, Bell Labs. So where I went to high school, where I lived in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, which bordered New Providence, New Jersey, Murray Hill, New Jersey was the headquarters that's where Bell Labs was located. 17,000 employees Ma Bell had housed there before the divestiture back in early 80s.
84, I think.
Yeah. And so when we actually took our school bus, we had to go take a left on Mountain Avenue, come around, and then we took a right to go up to our high school. And Bell Labs, if you're looking at this bus trip, I'm over here taking the bus on this road up, and Bell Labs is right here. So every day I went to high school for 4 years. You're looking at Bell Labs out the right-hand window as you go by. So it was really, and it was something that, when relatives came out or whatever, you give them a little tour of central New Jersey, and that was always a component of the tour, to drive through Bell Labs and, let them see it.
And say what you may about, cell phones today and technology, but a phone 50 years ago, a rotary or just a touch-tone dial phone, they worked, and they worked all the time.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of great work being done by the scientists and engineers at Bell Labs.
Well, we used to have to go. We could earn extra money at school. You could go in and find out what jobs were posted at Bell Labs, and so you could go in and do a hearing test and get paid. I forget what they paid, the going rate, but you could sit there for an hour and pick up $5.50 to just say, "Did you hear that clearly?" No, yeah, you need to be in these soundproof rooms, and it's kind of wild. But so at any rate, so you're in business. So let me ask a question, two-part question. Do you find that in your experience working with 21 companies, do you find that leaders in those companies can be slotted into like a zone that, you can say, well, that gentleman or that woman, their zone is finance, their zone is sales, their zone is, marketing, is it fair to slot people, leaders, into these zones? And if so, what was your zone? What is your zone, if you could explain a little bit more?
Yeah, a great question, and I do agree. I think people do find their zone, or maybe a niche is kind of a word I've used in the past. Specialty.
Okay.
It might be sales, it might be operations, it might be finance, but it might be understanding the voice of the customer or understanding the voice of the system. So I do think people gravitate toward some sort of zone, specialty, or a niche versus just, well, I'm just going to be kind of everything to everybody. And I think when they do find that zone is really when their passion tends to come out. That was the same with me when I started in the drugstore industry, and 23-year-old kid, they give a kid, well, you can't do any worse, and we're losing money now, so give it to the kid and see what he could do. Well, we started doing stuff, it started working, and the rest is history. So for me, my zone, I'm reminded of Toyota's motto, which big fan of Toyota, which is where lean comes from. The guys at MIT that studied it at Toyota Production System. Toyota's motto is, we build people, people build cars. I think that kind of fits me. So my zone is, how can I help people improve their work so they can find satisfaction, joy, pride in workmanship, pride in ownership, and go home at the end of the day and be satisfied knowing that their work matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, central to everything that you are about, and central to this show and my book and the things that we're about, and we've had this discussion before, is that ultimately some customer pays you for your goods or services. So your company doesn't exist if you don't get paid for something. So you've got to have a customer. Every company has a customers. Every company gets paid for the services they render or the goods they sell. And when you have these specialists, and when you have these niche professionals out there that love marketing or love finance or love administration or sales, do you find that it's hard to get them to funnel down to understand that at the end of the day, if that customer doesn't pay us or come back to pay us again or buy our products or services again, we lost? So no matter what your specialty is, you've got to at some point hone in on the customer experience. Is that?
I think you're spot on. Dr. Deming lamented business owners down to the frontline worker of not understanding their part in that whole cycle or that whole journey of the customer. He describes systems thinking. There are 7 components to it. I won't go into those. I have them in the Lean Academy. I'll send that document to anybody who wants it. But he said the first and foremost priority in the systems thinking environment is having an altruistic purpose.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, if you're just in business just to make a ton of money, you're never going to be happy. Your employees aren't going to be happy. You're not going to be thinking about the customer. But when you have an altruistic purpose, something that exists bigger than you and outside of your company, now you're on a mission. now you have a vision of, employing people, providing good wages, taking care of customers, having them come back, being a benefit to your community and your society, and the area at large as a whole.
Yeah.
And without that, you're a cog in a wheel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
who likes that? But that's where so many people find themselves today, because they don't understand how they touch that customer.
Yeah.
And sometimes the customer's internal. Sometimes the customer's a vendor.
Right.
But ultimately, someone's got to pay the bill, or
Right.
for the good product service that you're rendering in order to keep the lights on.
Right. Well, well put. Thank you so much. And I just keep what keeps drumming in my head is, I mentioned it a couple shows ago, this HGTV show, Vacation House Rules, and it's with Scott McElvery from Canada, and he remodels these vacation homes in Canada. And he's got 5 rules, and his 5th rule is be your guest. And so you said something that's very important. Every part of those systems somehow or another touch on the customer. Eventually, they do,
Sure.
or they have the ability to create an add to that touch. So it's so important for every business professional, every company, large or small, medium, I don't care where you are, what you do, what you sell, how you make money. You've got to understand what the customer thinks of you, how the customer sees your operation, how the customer feels about your operation. It's essential, and that's where we formed this bond. This we used to work the parking lot at church, welcoming people, and we would have these conversations at downtime. I mean, I remember them. It was like, wow, telling my wife, this guy Hal, he's on it. He really is. So if you could describe, Hal Moran and your specialty, your niche, your zone, what would your job title be?
Oh boy, job title.
The name of your professional capacity.
Yeah, I think it's probably what I ended up doing in healthcare when I retired. And actually, I retired due to the loss of my position when our company was purchased. But it was, building people to help them build cars, or pouring into people, helping people so that they can find satisfaction in their job, so that when they're touching that customer has a positive expance.
Okay. So a people builder, assistant people growth, and it's that's a wonderful and noble cause in life, and altruistic as well, to try to help people become better versions of themselves in a way. So
well, and I think you and I had this conversation. It goes back to Peter Schultz's book, who wrote the Leader's Handbook. He was a disciple of Dr. Deming. He passed away a few years ago, but in his book he talks about his desire was he was going to fix people.
Yeah.
Well, soon as after he got out and got on his own and started doing consulting, he knew he couldn't fix people, but he could help fix their jobs or help them fix their work. And in fixing their work, they were fixing themselves.
Yeah, there you go.
And so that's kind of where I am. So, if I can help people fix their work, improve their work, more satisfaction, happy work-life balance, and we know work-life balance in America today is in the pits.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, great. So then this word, there's a word that comes up as a central theme for you, and it's pretty much carried on throughout the rest of your career, and that's lean.
Yep.
Explain for the viewers and listeners about this, if you could.
Yeah, so lean, just maybe give a real brief snippet, and you can find more information at lean.org, which was lean.org. The Lean Enterprise Institute was created by the folks that coined the term lean back at MIT back in the 70s, who were students of the Toyota production system. So it's a great resource, a lot of free information, and just tons of articles and so forth. But lean, if you want to describe it in one sentence, it's eliminate waste and improve value. You can't improve value without eliminating waste. So it's kind of like a teeter-totter. When we were kids, you get on a teeter-totter and you have a lot of waste, you don't have a lot of value. But when you start removing that waste in a company and an organization, it increases the value, and that value should flow toward the customer. So you're really benefiting the customer and your organization as a whole when you eliminate waste. But that's kind of the methodology or the outgrowth of it, the tools. It starts with the principles of lean. Goes back to Japanese society. Toyota's been working on this for over 75 years. So, it's one of those things. Do you become lean? Well, I keep saying you keep leaning, improving going forward. So it's about respect for people. And, what people? Well, it's employees, it's customers. We talked about this. It's vendors, it's suppliers, it's teammates, it's anybody that your product or service touches. That's so people matter most. It's respect for people. And when you have respect for people, when you understand the principles of respect for people, go see, ask why, show respect, you're now on your way to understanding or having a better idea of what lean is. And then now there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of programs involved that you can pick up and use. But if you start with the perspective of, hey, I'm going to get lean so I can eliminate heads and just cut cost, that's not what lean is. Yeah. Quick example, 2008 when we had the market crash, GM filed bankruptcy, Ford stock went to a nickel a share, Chrysler filed bankruptcy, laid off hundreds of thousands of workers. Toyota didn't lay off a person, not one, because they saved for a rainy day, because they knew that their employees mattered most because they touched the customer. And so it's really that foundation of people matter most, respect for people, that sets lean apart from what I'll say is kind of your soup du jour or your management du jour. There's a lot of these things that come down the pike and people will try them for a month or two or three and then, that doesn't work, and they throw it aside. Yeah, it's not so with lean.
Yeah, interesting. Now, and thank you for that explanation. And you made a comment in there that I want to highlight too. That the energy flows, that everything flows to the customer. Yep. And I think that there's a lot of companies that make the mistake where they get employee centric. And I've said this before on my show that I'm all about employees being your most important asset. But when you're doing things, when there's time and motion and effort involved, and you're transferring that those list of things to do, and you give it to the customer and make it harder for the customer to do things and make it easier for your employees, that's not the flow you're talking about into the customer. It's right. You're making life more difficult for the customer, and you're flowing it back. For example, and again, I just I marvel at this. I've been writing these examples down for 30 years, preparing for my book, and then I scrap them and I come up with other ones because they always, I always have a modern day story. Last week, I had a situation where we sold these pallets, and the pallets are sold in these ratios of cases, and I've been selling them for 3 years, and all of a sudden my company comes back to me and says, hey, all the 10 purchase orders your customers submitted are all wrong ratios. Can you go back and have them redo the ratios, because it's going to be easier for us to pack it in the warehouse? So could you go back? And then I said, no, the ratios haven't changed in 3 years. I don't understand what you're talking about. The ratios to customer, no, the ratios are wrong. It was 192. It needs to be 256. And I said, look, I respectfully disagree, but I really disagree with the fact that you're willing to say, make the customer change their 10 purchase orders, go in and do that, then juggle all those balls internally just so it's easier for our warehouse people to pack a pallet. When the end result was they were wrong, they came back to me and said, you know what, we made a mistake. No reason to have your customer change the pallet count, the ratios. They're right. We were just multiplying something wrong. But the willingness of companies to just say, you know what, let's transfer that hardship, that I call it a weight-bearing load. Let's transfer that weight-bearing load to the customer so we make it easier on us.
It's happening millions and millions of times every day in American business. Every day.
Bingo. I see it. I work for 8 different companies, right? I mean, I see it. You see it. You smell it.
It happens every day.
So again, folks, this is where Hal's going to really break into the lean and expand on lean now. But this is really good stuff for understanding that that person that cuts you the check, that pays your bills for pays for your goods and services, it's essential to make them happy, and we have to do that. So I'm interested. We didn't cover this question up front, but I'm interested. Hal, do you have, or can you recall, kind of like a light bulb moment where you said to one of your superiors, somebody you reported to, "Hey, I got an idea. I think that if we did this and we injected some lean thinking here, this could be the result. Give me, let me prove it to you. Let me do it and see if it works out." And it worked out. Do you have is there something that sticks out in your mind as being like the first time you did that, and you know how it works. The boss comes back and says, "Hal, great job." And then you're like energized for a year. You're like, yeah, I want more. I mean, is there anything you can think of?
How much time do we have?
Well, give us just one example.
I'll give you a real quick recent one. One of the healthcare companies I work for, huge company, 160,000 employees, 30 different subsidiaries, non-for-profit, some were for-profit. So the organization I worked for had 5,000 employees in it. A lot of them were frontline clinical folks. And the turnover rate in this particular industry was really, really high. We had some facilities that had 170% turnover each year in their facilities. Overall company was 103%. So we had a little over 3,000 positions they had to fill every year. 3,000, I mean, that's about 60 a week.
That's a lot.
I mean, just think what that does to your HR staff and your field staff and your leadership staff. So this was just a couple of weeks after I came on board. I reported to the CEO and worked with the executive leadership team, CFO, chief nursing officer, so forth and so on. And so I was chatting with the senior director in HR one day, and she showed me this paper form that they had. And it's a PDF paper form that they had to fill out by hand, write it and get approvals for a requisition to replace a worker who might have left or got promoted for whatever reason. That person no longer there. And I said, "Seriously? Well, a PDF form you fill out with an ink pen and you sign it, and then you have to get 4 signatures on this and get it back to you and into the hiring manager before you can begin the process of hiring somebody." Yeah. I said, "This is insane. How long does this take?" She said, "Oh, it takes 2 to 3 weeks." I said, "Seriously?" And so I said, "Okay, well, do you think maybe we could just take that PDF, revert it back to a Word document, and make this thing electronic?" So bottom line, what I did was gathered all the data from her, HR director, met with her staff, wanted to talk to them, the pros and cons, what's working, what isn't working. Right. I didn't want to go over all the answers. I didn't have them. I'd been there for a couple of weeks. These folks had been there for years. They knew the system. Right? They knew all the components of what's working, what's not, the headaches and all the bugs. Met with them. We reverted or converted that PDF document to a Word document. So it doesn't stop there. And this is what's really cool about Lean. So we bring in the scientific method to Lean. Dr. Deming, Walter Short made it famous. So PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust. Right? So plan the work, do the work, study it, what's working, what isn't working, adjust it, make it better. So I took the paper part, and I go, okay, I want to see how long this takes myself. Filled it out by hand, went to the fax machine, faxed it to actually myself, signed it again, filled out some things, faxed it to myself. I had to do it 4 times because I had to get 4 signatures. And then I calculated, tracking the time, how long it took for all those sorts of things, added that up. And I said, okay, now I'm going to do a Word document and an email. I could type the data in instead of handwriting it. Gee, wouldn't that be clear? You can read something that's typed versus my handwriting. You'd never be able to read it. Send that in an email. I emailed it to myself. I looked at it, forwarded as approved to the quote-unquote next approver. Also, we eliminated 2 of the 4 approvers. Multiple approvers is waste. That's one form of waste. So at the end of the game, got back to the HR director, implemented it, and it ended up saving 2 FTEs. 2 FTEs.
Which stands for?
Full-time equivalent. Yeah, thanks. But not only that, so we could calculate the time savings and the energy and labor savings. What you can't calculate, and Dr. Deming was famous for harping on this, what's incalculable is the satisfaction, the attitude improvement of those folks involved in that system or that process.
Yes. Yes,
It brings joy back in the work. Instead of, I got to fax this thing
Right.
4 times,
Right.
and get a PDF and sign it and
Right.
wait for it to come back.
Right.
Email, attach it, boom, done. Same day versus 2 weeks.
And these are some of the little benefits that never even surface in the thought process that, hey, if we were to do that, would that worker actually feel better about things they do? You know?
Yeah, so people don't. Dr. Deming said, I know I quote him a lot. Dr. Deming said, people have 2 job descriptions. Number 1, do your job. Number 2, improve your job. Yeah. People don't go throughout their day, at least most, because they're either afraid, fear of reprisal, or I don't want to be the guy or gal that raises my hand and gets said no. They don't go throughout their day going, gosh, if we did this, it could save time or money or energy or improve satisfaction or whatever it might be. They don't do that. And that's the role of everyone. That's the role especially of leadership, to foster those types of attitudes and give people the freedom to improve their work, because ultimately value flows toward the customer. Period.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a happier worker.
Yeah.
So great example. And again, folks, we've talked about it here, but I think what Hal's painting a picture of too is he's taking processes, reducing the processes into a minimum amount of processes,
Taking off the waste,
speeding up the time, letting the internal company associates feel better about this new way of doing it, and that happier person interacts nicer in the break room with their associates, interacts nicer with the customer on the phone, goes home and says, I had a better day today than I had a week ago. And these are intangibles that we don't realize.
And in this particular case, you get people who left, you get their replacement hired a lot quicker. And when you're talking clinical staff, I mean, that's big. People in healthcare, you're replacing clinical staff. You get people hired quicker. Gosh, what does that do for patient value? You can't calculate that. You can't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in law enforcement footwear, again, with my sales agency for many, many years. And one of the interesting things about professional, industrial, public safety footwear is if that footwear is uncomfortable, the rest of that day is miserable. That person could be miserable. And if you just address the comfort, again, see the value, bring the value to the customer, flow it to the customer, make that shoe comfortable or that boot comfortable for the wearer, that wearer then has a better day, interacts with the community better. It flows out, and we don't think it does, but it does. You just can't measure a lot of things like that. So great story. I appreciate it. So you take on this, you champion, if you will, this whole concept of lean, taking the MIT initiative, the Deming initiative, and bringing this to the workplace, showing your employers how it can work. And so Lean Academy spawns out of this. Explain Lean Academy for us, if you could.
Yeah, so over my 40 years in healthcare, I worked, as you mentioned, for a number of companies, and 2 things stood out or were consistent in those organizations. Number 1, they lacked improvement strategies. As we mentioned, it's just this is the policy, just do it. Right, wrong, or indifferent, just do the work. The other was they either weren't using data or they were using data as a weapon. That's the 2 things that stuck out. So,
interesting.
And in using data as a weapon, they were looking for culprits, not causes.
Interesting.
Well, all right. So for work only produces 1 of 2 things: value and waste, right? And for every cause, there's an effect. And I get into that a lot in the Lean Academy. So I noticed those 2 things. Data's a weapon, and they had no way to implement improvement strategies. So I'm thinking, okay, gosh, this is, this is tough on everybody. It's hard on the workers. defective products, poor customer service, customers unhappy. 88% of the Fortune 500 companies that existed 50 years ago aren't in business today.
Wow.
I think it's a lot because they didn't know how to improve.
Yeah.
They were buggy whip, or they're buggy whip makers at the turn of the 20th century when people were making automobiles and had to use for them. I thought, okay, kind of what my core tenet in Lean is: learn a little, do a lot. So how could I bring people together, taking the information I've been working on, all my life, from Dr. Deming, from the folks at lean.org, from leaders like Peter Schultz and Walter Schubert and all sorts of folks, and put that into some concise information I think that can be easily understood, easily implemented, and give folks a foundation or a starting point of, well, how do we become lean? Yeah. How do we improve? What do we do? Again, as we talked about, is first of all understanding the principles. What is lean? What is systems thinking? And once you understand those, then it's, hey, what tools do I have at my disposal? How do I go about doing improvement? I talked about PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust. There's a real simple form, paper-based form. It can be electronic that helps you think through, how do I plan my work? How do I do my work? How do I study it, see if it's working or not? How do I adjust it, make corrections? So it's a continual cycle rolling uphill. How do I use an A3 document? I won't get into that, but it's about jotting down, what's happening, how is it happening, why is it happening, asking those questions of why is this happening? Help me understand this process. Then, what's the alternative? What do we think can happen? And then how do you go about implementing that? So I began putting these tools together that come from Lean and put it in a document so that folks had an avenue to go, okay, gosh, we have a starting point. And so I would do Lean Academies. I typically have 8, 10, no more than 12 people. We do about a 10-week course, meet every week, and we'd pick a project of something simple they could do tangibly, put their hands on, and improve it. Real quick example, one of the ones I did in a nonprofit, 3 of the folks in the academy were in the finance department, and they says, gosh, we'd love to tackle the PO process. I said, well, okay, PO process. It was a 3-part carbonless form. This was in the late teens, right? 20 teens. Yeah. And so we went to the CFO, didn't want to blindside him or catch him off guard, and said, hey, your folks brought up they'd like to do this project. We can do it in 10 weeks easy, actually less time than that. His exact words, and I quote, I'll never forget this quote as long as I live. We looked at the PO process 3 years ago and decided it couldn't be improved. My chin hit the floor. Yeah. So in 5 minutes, the folks developed an Excel format, fill out electronically, save it, reuse it when you go to the same place all the time, and kind of the rest is history.
Wow.
So it's real simple stuff, Jeff. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's just using a scientific methodology, knowing what happened, why. It's being a detective.
Right. Yeah,
you go to a doctor, what's he going to do? He's going to ask you questions. Where do you hurt? How does it hurt? Is it a dull pain or is it a sharp pain? Yeah. He's going to make a diagnosis and a recommendation to fix it. Yeah. No different.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you can break it down that way. In manufacturing. So in trouser manufacturing in the Caribbean, you measure things differently than you do out in Asia or the subcontinent, out in India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. But in the southern hemisphere, in Mexico and the Caribbean, you measure production in standard assembly minutes. So what you do in a pair of trousers, you look at a pair of trousers and you go, you know what, I have 9 people in this little pod. We should be able to make X amount of trousers a day. But let's understand what we're doing to figure out why we're making that amount of trousers a day. So you break down every little component of that production into an understandable, quantifiable portion of time. And so you go, okay, we're making pants in 31 minutes. It's taking us collectively 31 minutes, standard assembly minutes, to make that pair of trousers. We need to get it down to 28. If we're going to operate at peak efficiency, we want to get it down to 28. Well, you find that sometimes, maybe this person is bringing a bundle of cut parts over here and putting it over here, So they walk around you, and then when you need that bundle of cut parts, you have to swivel your chair backwards, get it, bring it around to the mouth of the workstation you have and bring it there. Well, wouldn't it just be easier if that person dropped it off at the mouth of the workstation and then you just had to go with your left arm and bring it up and put it into your workplace rather than spend the extra 13 seconds to wheel your chair around, finagle it behind you to bring it over to the mouth of the workstation. And, once you realize, a pair of trousers was 4 sheets. There were 4 pages of, rows in an Excel sheet of assembly. So believe it or not, there's that many components. And if you can save 13 seconds here and 7 seconds there and 8 seconds there and do all that, you can bring your standard assembly minutes down. Now, I give that example to say we can also do that in the PO process. Oh, we looked at it 3 years ago, can't be improved. My gosh, are you kidding me? It absolutely can be improved. And you know what? I mean, I look at things like, improvement, and I'm sure Lean Academy has this, and tell me if you've ever done anything like this. But I've always said, in customer service, get to the customer before they get to you.
Yep.
So let's say you have an internal customer, right? And I've always given this example. Let's say that I work 240 business days a year. I have 1 question a day to my customer service team. So I'm asking 240 questions a year, right? Okay. Now, a lot of those questions are repetitive. A lot of those questions are just intrinsic to the customer service process. So what if you, as the manager, said to this person, hey, don't make Jeff ask 240 questions because 120 of those you can provide him without him ever asking, right? It's just a courtesy communication. He's asking for, hey, did that get picked up on the trailer yesterday? Or when, whatever the question may be, you can now initiate those 120 updates to Jeff. Jeff cuts his questions down to 120 a year to you instead of 240. The system moves quicker. It's more lean. But what happens is I ask 240 questions. I don't get answers. Then I have to ask the 240 questions a second time. And now I'm up to 480. And then I got to ask, in some cases, 120 of those 240 questions a second time. And now I'm up to 600 questions. And my whole argument is, hey, we could run this department on 120 questions a year versus 600, right? And that is, you're building better workplaces, you're building better camaraderie with the associates. The associates feel better. That energy flows to the customer, that available time, that energy can flow to the customer rather than this drudgery of, oh, Mason's a pain in the butt. He's asking me the questions again. No, you've got it backwards. The POs can't be improved. We looked at it 3 years ago. No, customer service can't be garbage. It's absolute garbage. You can approach it. You can break down the components of what you're doing like you do an Excel spreadsheet, like you do making a pair of trousers. You can break it down into standard process minutes. Have you ever done anything like that?
Yeah, it kind of takes me back to one of the foundation principles that they have at Toyota's no problem is a problem, meaning there's always something to improve.
Yeah.
They had a goal a few years ago. I'm not sure what their goal is today, but a few years ago they had a goal of 1 million improvement ideas to be generated in a year.
Wow.
And to implement 90% of them.
Wow.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Now, Toyota's a big corporation. I get it. So maybe it's not 1 million for your company. Maybe it's 20. Maybe it's 10. Maybe it's 50. Maybe it's every person does 1 or 2 improvements in their job alone. Yeah. Jeff, it'll transform an organization. It's just, and plus, as Dr. Demi talked about in his 14 points, it brings back pride of workmanship. Instead of just, I'm a wheel and a cog, and at 8 or 5 o'clock I get to go home. Yeah. And not knowing if my work mattered. Yeah. But restore pride in workmanship. Give people, allow them to have input into what they do. The person who best knows how to improve their work, as Dr. Dimon and others have said, is the person doing it. It doesn't mean leadership doesn't have some answers. Well, sure they do. Yeah. Working in healthcare 40 years, I had some answers, some solutions, some ideas, but collaborating with the folks that were doing it, well, now you've got a team of folks. Yeah. This person does this. But gosh, at the end of the day, We have an immediate Excel document, to track and do POs, which is real funny. So I asked the controller of that company, I said, hey, by the way, of all the POs generated, how many of them are approved? He says over 99%. My question was, why do we have POs? Why have them? If you're approving 99.5, and really it's probably 100%, but he said 99 plus. It kind of goes back to, you've seen the glass with the water in it half full. Right. People say, oh, is it half empty or half full? I say, neither. Why is the glass twice as big as it needs to be?
I've never heard that before.
Right?
I love it.
Right? Why is it twice? Why is it twice the size it needs to be?
I love it.
So anyhow, that's lean. It's just taking out waste. When you remove waste, like that teeter-totter, it increases the value flowing to the customer. And it's not hard. It's not difficult. Commitment to it is you have to be totally committed. You got to jump in with both feet. But once you do, and your employees see that senior leadership's behind it, they have an opportunity to speak up, to be heard, to gain trust, remove fear. Gosh, it will transform your organization.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate that very much. How funny shout out to Toyota. We're not getting paid by Toyota. No. We don't do anything. But I have to tell you.
But you can if you want.
I have to tell you this, though. We bought a Toyota Avalon for my wife on her birthday in 2001. And 232,000 miles later, she still drives that Toyota Avalon today. It's been paid off since 2005. But here's my point. My point is she loves that car so much that, it's garage kept. We do the proper maintenance. So she loves it so much, she's not going to get rid of it. We take that into the mechanics, we take it in to get serviced. These guys go, Mr. Mason, that car is flipping outrageous. It's unbelievable. It's like it's 2 years old. So talk about flow to the customer. Now, they did not put built-in obsolescence into that vehicle where I was forced to buy a new vehicle 4 years after it was paid off in 2009. They flowed that service, they flowed that energy to the customer, meaning me, us, to a point where I get to have this car. I mean, my wife and I are like, we're going to make this car a 25-year car. I mean, it's going to be a 25-year car. They become classics at the end of 25 years, right? I mean, we're going to have a classic in our garage, and my wife is going to have a hard time parting with it.
And when you do buy another car, maybe your chances, Toyota's banking on the fact that, hey, these guys kept this car for 25 years. Hopefully they'll buy another Toyota.
Oh, we have our eye on a Highlander.
I know. Oh, yeah, man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we are going back to Toyota, trust me. And it's, it's just, it's a great example. I mean, 1 million improvements and to install 90%. Unbelievable.
And you know what? MIT they put their courseware online, open courseware. I'm not sure if most folks know about that, but a lot of fine universities put their courseware online. You can get everything except a diploma. You can get the videos, you can get the syllabus, the materials. So I did a lot of my research and study through MIT online. I just don't have a sheepskin for it. But in one of their lean classes, they show some statistics from Ford, GM, and Chrysler, the big three in this country, and how much training they do and how long it takes them from concept to completion on a new vehicle versus Toyota. Toyota spends exponentially more in training their employees on the job, training within industry, or TWI, some of your folks might know that, versus Ford, GM, and Chrysler. Ford, GM, and Chrysler do it because they have to. Toyota does it because they want to invest in their workers. That 2008 scenario we talked about, the big recession, Toyota invested that time in training employees and how to think leaner. What can we do? How can we move this part quicker? How can we reduce inventory? How can we increase flow? That's what Toyota was doing. Instead of laying people off, they were figuring out how they can improve quicker.
Yeah. So this really hand in glove fits your passion to help people become better. And if you help people become better, the processes can come.
And because it's good for me as a consumer, I'm getting a better product at the end of the day. So are you. So is our community.
Yeah.
It's altruism. Yeah. It's about having an altruistic purpose to your business, to better your business, to be a benefit to that community. Yeah. Isn't that why you exist?
Yeah.
Not why some folks exist, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely, sadly. So is Lean Academy now, is this something that you've taken the elements of Lean and you've combined it and you've created this? This is your creation, Lean Academy? Okay.
Yeah, so, and I know we couldn't get into it today, obviously. It's too big a subject, too big a topic. But I tried to put in, again, in a PDF format. It's about 63 pages. I have an introduction, what is it? What are the principles? What are the topics? What's systems thinking? There's some cute videos in there, short 2-minute, YouTube videos that explain some things that are kind of humorous. And then I go into what are some of those tools. I mentioned the A3 and the PDSA and value stream mapping and Hoshin Conry and 5S, and it goes on and on and on. But there's a lot of graphics, infographics, and charts and diagrams and things like that, process behavior charts. I'm amazed that business leaders today don't have process behavior charts. It'll tell you if your system's performing like it should. Real simple. I can put them together in no time for folks. So it's those sorts of things that are in there. It gives you a thumbnail sketch, a good jumping off point. Then if you want to go deeper, then there are resources for that. Like I said, lean.org is a great resource. They do a lot of seminaries across the
seminars.
Seminars across. They might do seminaries, I don't know, but seminars across the country that folks can go to. You can tour the Georgetown, Kentucky plant, Toyota, and watch this stuff, working on a daily basis. So that's the purpose of my Lean Academy document, to give folks an idea of what it's about, what's involved, what the investment is, not from a financial standpoint, but just from a time, energy, cultural kind of a thing. And then if they would want to know more, I would certainly make myself available, on some kind of small remuneration of taking a little bit deeper to see if it's something they're interested in, would want to be a part of it, and then there are resources outside of myself to help them with that.
And we'll get to some of your contact information towards the end. So do you believe that, are you a believer that each team in any company really has hidden opportunities to implement Lean?
Yeah, no doubt. It's because, and I think, full disclosure, because I've been doing it for so long, even around the house, honey, if we just, so I bring Lean into the home, sometimes to my wife's delight, sometimes to her chagrin. I do it out in restaurants. We'll be sitting there and like, oh gosh, if they would just do, I could get my fries faster or whatever. Seeing the waiters do this and that and this when they could do it in a flow to make it easier for the customer. There's waste everywhere. Yeah. If someone says we don't have any waste in our company, I've got a chart or a little infographic I like to share with you that will really open your eyes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you mentioning that there really is probably hidden opportunity everywhere, and it's just a matter of, and it comes down to this matter. And I've just worked with a president of an international company recently, and this gentleman was very, very frustrated. I won't mention the company's name, but very frustrated that there is not a hunger. There is not an appetite within the workforce to want to get better. And how do I find those workers, those people who have the hunger to want to improve? And his question to me is, Jeff, in your walk, do you find that there are people that just don't have the humility to look at themselves and the environment that they're in and say, wow, I can improve that, I can improve this, I can improve that. They just kind of, I don't even know what the right explanation is, but they just kind of go through their workday, maybe never even thinking about ways to improve. But do you agree with that there's a certain, apprehension from people out there because they just don't have the hunger, the appetite to get better?
Yeah. Peter Drucker, management guru, long
Peter
time
Principle.
ago. Yeah. I think it was 1978, said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And he's right. So if you have an endemic culture of apathy, take customers for granted, don't look for ways to improve, I don't fault the worker for that. I fault leadership for it. When I was at one healthcare company interviewing with the CIO of the company, we were talking about leadership principles, and we kind of agreed. I said all success and all failures laid at the feet of leadership, and he says, I tell my people all the time, if you want to know what the problem is, go look in a mirror. Leadership. So if you have foundational leadership that's committed to people. People matter most. If they're committed to improving, if they're committed to respect for people, a lot of these core principles we've talked about all morning long, it starts there. But if the CEO, the president, the vice president, the department leader is apathetic, his staff's going to be apathetic. Now, you might have some, Johnny Go-Go's out there. There's always going to be a few of those people, but that'll never transform a company. You've got to transform the company at the top and at the bottom and every place in between. You've got to own it. When you own it, you can truly see business dynamics take off and improve. But unless you don't, if you've got like I said, a president or someone in senior leadership or a group of them that are just, get out there and just do it, man, it's just bad news.
Yeah, well, I worked for a company once that, one of the executives that, odd, but one of the executives that got fired wrote a book on culture. And then, we were all tasked with the responsibility of reading this book. And we read this book, and I mean, every one of us to a person said, this is totally, first of all, we're reading it from a guy who got fired. Second, everything in this book is the antithesis of what we are experiencing every day. There's nothing in this book that's present and accounted for. Nothing. So what what was really sad about that is the people in the company said, are leaders that out of touch? They really think this is the culture with the everyday worker and the cubicles and everything? They're nuts. They're so far removed from the reality of what's going on. I mean, do you find that?
Well, it goes back to, I mentioned the three things about lean up front: go see, ask, why, show respect. So if you go to a Toyota plant today, one of the subsidiaries, you'll see those leaders, senior leaders, as well as frontline leaders out from behind the desk, going and seeing what's happening on the shop floor. Yeah. Otherwise, they send in a report and they're behind their desk. They never get outside the four walls of their desk. They don't know what's going on out in the field or out on the floor.
Absolutely.
They don't know what's working, what isn't working. They don't know the attitude of their folks. But if you can go out there and see it, hey, Fred, tell me what frustrates you about your job right now. What's working, what isn't working? Right. What's that going to communicate to Fred?
Right.
Hey, this person's interested in me. Hey, Sally, tell me, what do the customers think about this? What's their experience? How are you engaging with them, and what feedback are you getting? How might we improve that situation? Sally's now going to have a little bit higher opinion and respect for that person as well as herself to go, gosh, this person cares about my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, Tom Peters, management by walking around, MBWA, right?
MBWA, managed by wandering about or walking around,
I mean, get out there. Frank Perdue realized, I read a couple of his books, and, he realized in the chicken business that, I want the scouts, the people who know what's going on, the best of anybody are the salespeople. They're out there with the customer. Well, guess what? I want to ride with the salespeople to understand what the customers are really saying. Again, the three magic questions. What do you like? What don't you like? What would you improve? If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, what would you do? And, Frank, oddly enough, he said, I only operate on two questions. I don't want to hear what I'm doing good. So I better know what I'm doing good, right? So let's scrap that. So it's, what am I doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? How can we improve? And so, interesting. So Lean Academy, so available. You can come to Hal. Hal is certainly available now to work with any organizations if they want to certainly meet with Hal. And, in line with that, you currently run a business, and is that the easiest way for them to get in touch with you if they were to, and could you tell us a little bit about the business you did?
Besides being so the mom side of me, the artist side, is I've always been creative. It came out a number of years ago, so I've been in photography for a long time. Always enjoyed landscape photography, but when COVID hit, and I also always enjoyed wildlife and the natural surroundings. So since COVID started, I started doing bird portraits in my backyard, and I ventured out and I do it out in the field now. So I've got over 2,500 bird portraits that I do. My website is halmoran.com. Facebook, Hal Moran Photo, Instagram, Hal Moran. So you can find me out there if you just Google it. And if someone is interested in the Lean Academy document, that PDF version, I'd be happy to email it to them. They could simply go to the bottom of any page on my website, the home page, you scroll to the bottom, there's a contact form, just ask for your name and your email address, and then just put in there, hey, I'd like the Lean Academy document, and I'll either email it to them, no charge. But that's what I'm doing now. I love it. It's just been pretty successful. Before that, I did a lot of art shows and those sorts of things, and had that artwork, sold throughout the country and exhibited in for-profit, not-for-profit organizations. So it's been a nice aversion for me, and since I'm retired, it's given me something to do as well.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, guys. HalMoran.com. It's great stuff. In our home, we probably have about 4 pieces hanging on the wall of what you've done, and certainly we've followed you since 2003 with distinctions, and I mean it's been a pleasure watching you grow as an artist as well, doing that on the side and now doing it full time. So again, that's how you can get hold of Hal. We're going to collaborate on a piece of artwork. So what we're going to do, sometimes we have a little 24 by 24 inch, kind of vinyl picture that hangs on the wall for background in our show. We're going to work with Hal and pick something out, transfer it over to canvas, and put it up as a backdrop from time to time. So we'll get some of his artwork out here, and when we do, we'll mention, again, his website. And we're going to have Hal back. We're going to transition, SimpleBiz360 podcast is going to transition its later shows to a little bit briefer format, 3 tips in 5 minutes kind of feel, if you will. And we're going to have Hal back for a couple lean exercises and maybe even a longer interview just on lean as well, if you're up to it. Sure. But we certainly appreciate your time. So we ask all of our guests, including Hal, hey, dive deep back into your musical likings and grab, what's a lost in the shuffle rock and roll tune, or a rock and roll or a Christian tune or whatever that means something to you and has a special place, and we're going to share that with the audience. And if you don't mind, what song is that?
And I think it kind of fits my personality and kind of my whole zone kind of a thing. YouTubes, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. So that's kind of me. I go through life still seeking that, not necessarily perfection, but still haven't found what I'm looking for. I was kind of that way as a kid, just always looking for the next thing and looking to improve something. So, hey, I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
Well, very cool. I think that's the second or third time U2's made it. So awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, we had somebody pick Bad before, and then this is great. And so we'll feature that. We'll have a nice in the upper right hand corner of our screen on the YouTube experience. You'll see a little Matt will put up a little icon up there, and then you can just click on that icon. It'll take you right to U2's video. One of the biggest bands ever, greatest bands ever. I still think, I love the albums. I think one of the top 5 albums, in my opinion, of all time is Achtung Baby. When they came out, I know this song's not up, but when they came out with that, it was just, it had a different, it took a right-hand turn, it was a different sound, and it just electrified me,
And I think artists like, Bono and YouTube, their art's bigger than themselves, and that I think is what attracted me to them. That's kind of what Kaizen or continual improvement is. Lean, it's bigger than yourself. There's something altruistic about it.
Very cool. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for all the inspiring conversations over the decades. I really have enjoyed it thoroughly enjoyed having you on here, and I hope you guys did too. Again, we're coming from Half Coast Studios. Maddie Parker on the boards as always. We are in St. Louis, Missouri, specifically the Creve Coeur area. So coming to you from the Archway City, and we just thank you for being a part of this show, and we just encourage you, if you want to change the results of your business, please look at the how you're doing business, because that is the team of horses pulling the results cart. We will see you in 168 hours. Thank you. Thanks, Hal.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jeff.